Okay, well, I think we waited long enough, so if anybody wants to join in, that's great. If not, let's just start. So hello. Today we'll be covering the fundamentals of web design Thinkful workshop. So it's just going to be a workshop aimed towards improving the design skills of anybody who's maybe a bit insecure about how they can improve the design of their web apps. This is something I personally had got a lot of trouble when I was first starting up, so I definitely felt like this could be like maybe a bit of a hole that I could help fill in. Now, as far as the session agenda, we'll be covering 5 topics today, which will be the introduction, a brief introduction about what is web design, and then the 3 main pillars, which we'll be discussing today, that are typography, color theory, and whitespace. And last but not least, UX design, which is maybe less to do with about web design, but still a very important area to consider when you're building a website. So if there's a lot of content on these slides, that's okay. I'm not going to go through all of it because we just have 1 hour and we have a lot to cover. So if you want, I will be sending out the slides. So you can always just open the slides in your free time, open the links. I added a ton of links to be used as support material. So if you have questions, feel free to just check out the slides at a later time. All right. Now, what is web design? So the term is usually just used to describe the design process relating to the front end, or usually this is what we call the client side design of a website. This usually includes writing the markup. So web designers are usually expected to have an awareness of usability, and if the role involves creating a markup, then they're also expected to be up to date with web accessibility guidelines. So in this sense, it's actually a pretty cool thing that we already know how to code. So that's actually a huge bonus for web designers, because being able to code markup means that they can just be more involved in the web development process. And also, accessibility guidelines and standards are also something that's not often considered, but that's also a fundamental pillar of making good UX for websites, which we'll learn a bit more about that soon. So, what affects design? So before we even consider starting the design process, we need to be cautious about things that affect it. So usually this can be things like the target audience. So the age, gender, profession, even hobbies of a person greatly changes the approach you should be taking to this design job. Same thing goes as things like the communication medium. Is this web, printed, video, or even the tone? A serious tone and a casual tone are drastic changes in what your final design will be like. So you won't be using something maybe cheerful for a serious tone, and just like that, you might not be doing something very elegant looking if it's a casual tone. So it's important that you know all of this before you start with the design process. So having said that, let's begin with the first pillar, which is typography. So what is typography? Now, typography is quite simply the art and technique of arranging type. By type, this is a term we sometimes use to refer to fonts. So typography is central to the skills of a designer and is about much more than just making the words legible, because anybody can make words legible. So the role here is actually to think about the choice of typefaces. Typefaces also, again, are a name for fonts, and how we make it work with our layout, grid, color scheme, design team, and so on. Because this is what makes a huge difference between good, bad, and great design. So it's a lot more than just picking a cool looking font. There's a lot more to it, and we'll learn about that soon. So let's start with the first subtopic in typography, which is font families. So font families is basically just the major types of fonts that exist. So I'm not talking about just like, oh yeah, there's Arial, there's Verdana, there's Times New Roman. No, I mean actual font types. So the first font type we'll review is Serif. So serif fonts are usually named after the small lines that come at the end of each letter, called serifs. So we'll see some serifs soon. So some variations of the serif fonts are humanist and modern. So I want you to notice how both fonts, they have like those tiny lines or triangles, or however you want to call them, those tiny like extensions that come at the end of each letter. So those are what we are calling serifs. That's why this is called the serif font. So the humanist type of serif font is basically just goes around that the thinnest parts of the letters appear usually on the angled strokes rather than the vertical or horizontal ones. These are usually characterized by feeling like almost somebody could have written this, like maybe with a pen or some kind of human usable tool, right? And then modern is another cool font for serif. This usually has a more pronounced contrast between thin and thick lines, and usually have a lot of vertical stress with minimal brackets. So as you can see, it's very modern looking, and they're actually a good fit for some kinds of designs. Now, if we look at the next font type, which is the second major one, it's sans serif. We call it sans serif because it's sans the serif, so without the serif. These are the more modern looking fonts. So yeah, as you can see, sans serif is short for without the serifs. So the three major variations of sans serif fonts are grotesque, humanist, and geometric. So the grotesque font is the most common type of sans serif font. You're probably already familiar with this one. And it's basically just, there is no really guide to grotesque fonts. We just call them grotesque because when they're similar to serif fonts, but just lack the serif, all right? Now, humanist is a bit more interesting because these are usually more calligraphic. So if you notice, like the comparison here, Arial and Tahoma, you'll notice that Tahoma seems to have some changes in the width of each letter. In some situations, there's a bit more human-like curves, and this makes humanist sans serif fonts usually easier to read. And last but not least, we have geometric fonts. Now, geometric fonts are based on geometric shapes, and they're very modern looking. They're a personal favorite of mine. I really like geometric fonts. So yeah, these are pretty cool fonts to use. And last but not least, we have script fonts. So script fonts are just fonts that are highly calligraphic. And what we mean by this is that it's almost something you could 100% type as a human being. Now, the downside is the lack of readability in many scenarios makes this a poor fit for body copy. What do I mean by body copy? Basically, the text that matters. So if you have let's say you make a page and you have a text on the landing page that's very important, this is body copy, and you should not use script font types for body copy because they're usually almost never very readable. So the two biggest script types are formal script and casual script. So formal is usually quite effective at elegant designs as long as you're not using it for body script. Like definitely this could be a great fit for maybe the title of I don't know, a flyer or a site, but absolutely not for body copy. So, and then casual script, this is actually quite usually casual script is actually a semi good fit for body copy depending on the font type. The downside is, yeah, these vary a lot in the message they convey, so you need to be careful about when picking one casual script font. Like in this example, there's Comic Sans, which you would probably never want to use, but it's a perfect example just to showcase what casual script is like. Fonts that you can literally write, right, as a human being. Now, with that said, combining fonts is always a tricky topic. So I have three major tips to give you when you're combining fonts. Now, the first one would be don't choose fonts from the same style. This is an easy tip to follow, and it goes a long way at helping you build a better layout. So, for example, don't choose the same font from sans serif and sans serif. That very likely won't work out very well. So try to combine them. Then, when it turns to combining them, you try to combine one sans serif font and one serif font, and this usually tends to have pretty great results. So, good rule of thumb: combining sans serif plus serif fonts are usually a pretty good idea. You can combine two serif fonts or two sans serif fonts, but it's harder, to make them work. This is why I'm just giving you these easy tips to follow. And then the last one is that if you're mixing fonts from different styles, try to find relationships. So by this I mean, remember how we covered that there was a humanist serif font and there's also a humanist sans serif? This is what I mean by this. Try to find similar font families because they also tend to get along quite well. And last but not least, final pro tip, there is absolutely nothing wrong with using a single typeface. So if at a loss, you can always just use one font, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'd be surprised how far you can actually go by just using one font. So yeah, now one topic I do want to talk about very briefly is that you should be aware that fonts usually have a price. This is something that surprised me. I'm not a web designer, but when I wanted to pick a nice looking font for my site, I was surprised at how expensive they can get. I really wanted to use Proxima Nova, which was very popular, and I think it's still very, very popular. But holy crap, it is an expensive font. Like the prices range from $49 to $6.99, and this still, I'm not 100% sure if this even includes commercial use. So, oh dang, like that's a very expensive font. But yeah, thankfully we have Google Fonts that came to our rescue. So Google Fonts is an online developer-friendly repository that hosts a variety of free-to-use fonts. I really like the design layout of Google Font. It's very clean, it's very aesthetic. It makes it super easy to find great-looking fonts. And the surprise for me was the fonts are actually quite good. Like, I am very surprised at the quality of many fonts in Google Fonts, to the point I couldn't care less if I couldn't get Proxima Nova. Like, I'm fairly certain I found much better looking fonts on Google Fonts. So yeah, quality fonts, free to use, even for commercial use Google Fonts and respect author IP. All right. Now, typography, visual hierarchy. This is a topic that is usually better explained by showing you by example how we can see what changes we can do to some text to improve its visual hierarchy. So this is a text we're going to be working on. So it's just a bland, boring paragraph. So you'll notice it's not very interesting. It's not very inspiring to look at. We have little motivation to start reading this. It's just a wall of text. And the best feedback we can get from this is the long lines are very hard to read. We normally measure lines in CPLs, or characters per line. And to fix this, we just change the CPL. So a good number for CPLs is 50 to 70. So 50 to 70 CPLs is usually optimal. I'm a fan of 80. I think 80 works fine in a lot of use cases, as long as you do it correctly. And also, some new feedback. It looks like there's no order here. Like, there's no hierarchy as far as the structure of this text. So to fix this, we can do it by just adding headers and paragraphs. So large headers and subheaders along with different size paragraphs. Like, this is the same text, but notice how just adding the headers and splitting into two paragraphs makes this so much easier to read. And these differences of size and importance help orient the user and give their eyes something to latch onto. So this is already looking pretty good, but we can go further. Spacing. So spacing, or white space, which is something we'll learn about very soon, is something we can add to make the text a lot easier to read. So now, notice how the text just has so much more breathing room. It makes it like more, okay, this looks very comfortable to read. I want to read this. So this is usually achieved by increasing the line height to make the text easier to read. Just be cautious. Too much or too little line height can make it harder to read than it initially was. A good rule of thumb is 1.2 to 1.5 times line height is usually optimal. What we mean by 1.2, 1.5 is the space between each line is 1.x, the amount of height for every average letter, for example. So if this is 1, then 1.5 will be 1, and then half of that. So that's 1.5. All right? Cool. Now, that's pretty much it. All we have about typography. So we have some effective typography examples here. So let's just quickly review them. So the first one is foundstudio.com. So let's open that super quick. Let's load that site. Let's also open these two sites in the background while we're at it. So the first one is a pretty good site because it uses large for small font sizes, which combined with a serif plus and serif font combinations make for effective visual hierarchy. Let me show you that. So if you look at this site, once it finally loads, so notice how there's sans serif plus serif font combinations on every single element here. And this makes it easy for the title to stand out from the subtitle. So overall, it's a very clean layout, which I actually quite enjoy. So that will be example one. example 2 we have here is actually quite cool because it looks like they're using just a single font, but notice how it's used to great effect. So definitely, again, more proof that using a single font isn't necessarily a bad thing. So yeah, and then last but not least, we have Product Hunt. Google Type from Fembot. So this is actually one of my, if not my favorite, my favorite link showcasing Google fonts combinations. So in this site, you can basically see sample layouts that this person built, showcasing 2 different Google fonts and showing how they can be used to great effect. So here they're telling you they're using Playfair Display plus Fauna 1, and this looks gorgeous. Then we have Focus 1, Older Script, and Modded Regular, and also that looks amazing. Then we have Unica 1 and Bullhorn, that looks pretty cool. Then a bit more of a spacey themed one, Megrim plus Roboto Slav. These work amazing as well, if you ask me. This is one of my favorite ones on the site. Then we have some more muted ones like Open Sans and Gentium Basic. So yeah, fantastic inspiration, as you can see here, just to better improve your font combination skills. So yeah, you can take a peek at this at a later time. And then last but not least, we also have some bonus round resources. So if you're ever interested in learning more about typography, these are my favorite all-time links for typography. So the first one is a crash course in typography, which is a pretty in-depth one. So only do this if you have the time, but holy crap, that was an amazing read. Then you also have Understanding Typography from Material Design blog. It's a very developer-friendly explanation of typography. And I actually like this because it talks to you in developer terms. And then we have Type.io, which is also a must read if you're interested in improving your typography skills, because it gives you monthly font inspiration and even uses sites as a showcase of examples of font combinations. And last but not least, Font Pair. So if you're also struggling to find like what's the perfect font pair, you can always just visit this site, and they'll offer new font combinations on a daily basis. They have a superb amount of variety. So yeah, that's pretty much all we have for typography. Now let's move to color theory. So color theory is basically the science and art of color. Now this is how humans perceive color, how colors mix, match or clash, and even the subliminal and often cultural messages that colors communicate, as well as the methods used to replicate color. So as you can probably imagine, this is quite a large topic, easily the largest one in web design if you ask me. So don't take my word for it, since I'm not a designer, but at least in my experience, there's just so much to know about color. I honestly don't think I even covered the top of it, but I'll do my best to summarize it during this presentation. So first subtopic is the psychology of color. So this is a quick table you can use to reference, and just come back to this when you have the time. But this shows you some of the basic emotions and messages that some colors convey. So if we quickly go through this, for example, red. Notice how some restaurants tend to use red. That's because red sometimes is associated with hunger. And it's actually, I think there's been some studies that prove that red does increase the amount of hunger one has. Blue also is a site that you see very commonly in IT companies. So the reason why, it's because it's usually also associated with trust, integrity, confidence, or even peace organizations like the UN also use blue, because blue is also associated with peace. Then we have colors like green, which is very often used in everything nature related. Black, which is usually related with sophistication, mystery, formality, and white, which is also a very great color to use for companies, because it conveys precision and in some situations even purity, innocence. So yeah, it's a handy table that you should definitely take a look at, and it's pretty cool just to have this as a reference. Or you can just Google psychology of color in Google and find dozens of tables like this one. But yeah, let's move on now. So yeah, let's imagine you understand psychology in color and you're an expert at this, but you should also remember that color changes meaning in some cultures. And let me give you a good example of this. The color red is something we associate with power and intensity in the Western world. But in China, it's more associated with good luck, while in Africa, it's the color of morning. So, yeah, wow, that's a very big meaning change. So, just a pro tip, if you're considering going global, you definitely need to do some kind of investigation about if that color you picked doesn't have any drastic meaning changes depending on the culture of the country you'll be working on. So, yeah, color and culture, don't forget that. Then we have combining color, one of the funnest areas of color theory. So, when you're combining color, there's a ton of techniques that you can use, seriously. But I'm just going to try to cover the most common ones. So, the most common and I could say effective ones are monochromatic, complementary, analogous, and triad. So, monochromatic is basically just the same color hue, different shades, while complementary is 2 colors from the opposite sides of the color wheel. Analogous is 3 colors, and triad is 3 colors in opposite sides. So, if that doesn't make sense, not to worry. We have a better infographic here. So, here you can notice how complementary colors are literally just 2 colors, opposite sides. Analogous are 3 colors, but subsequent one from the other. Triadic, which are just basically 3 colors on opposite sides. And then these 2 minor ones, which are split complementary and tetradic. These are not very commonly used, but they can be quite effective if used correctly. And then we also have this color wheel, which is also quite cool to look at, because here we can clearly identify what are warm colors and what are cool colors. I think this is good enough for color combination. Now, contrast is something we don't often consider. So, too little contrast is usually a factor of having hard to read text. So, as you can see, that gray and yellow text on the start, wow, that's painful to read. And then too much contrast can also be jarring. Notice how I've been using a gray font, but then I use example 1 with a black font, and it just stands out. Like, wow, that really stands out. And then example 2 as well. It uses maybe too much contrast because these are very clashing colors, like orange and red. So that's also something you have to be aware of. And then last but not least, you need to be also aware that some colors are actually very hard to tell apart. Not just for us, but for colorblind people. So try to avoid colorblind color combinations like these 2. So if this is an issue, then what do you do? And the answer is simple. Monochromatic contrast is very effective in most situations. So if you're at a loss or not 100% sure what you should go for, monochromatic is a pretty good way to go. So consider that. All right. Now, follow the standard. So this is actually something pretty cool to consider. And basically, if you're ever curious, like how much contrast is enough, there's actually an official worldwide standard for contrast. So right now, the official standard requires that normal text has a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1, while large text can have a contrast ratio of 3 to 1. If you're curious, like what the heck do these numbers mean, you can use this contrast checker online, and you can add the colors here, and it will tell you what contrast ratio you have. So, for example, let's say this is our background color, and this is the text color. So this color has a contrast ratio of 5.81 to 1. So that's definitely good enough. But if we were to use maybe a shade of gray, notice how this suddenly just became a much smaller contrast ratio, just a change of color. So now we have to make this much, much darker until it passes the contrast ratio. All right. So yeah, this is a tool you definitely want to use to just help you pick good contrast ratios. So yeah, follow the standard. And then we have color theory, color for developers. Yay. Now, if we finally get to where we can actually start using color as developers, right? So you're probably familiar with color using the RGB color model, which is an additive color model in which red, green, and blue light are added together in various ways to produce a broad array of colors. So, for example, because it's RGB, red, green, and blue, you could represent red with 255 units of red and 0 of green and 0 of blue, because that's RGB. The thing about RGB is that RGB is not very easy to update. Like if you want to make, let's say, a blue purple, you have to mix and match the amount of red, green, and blue, and it's not very developer friendly. So if you're ever working with colors, I highly recommend you never use RGB. Try to use HSL. So HSL was created as an alternative representation of the RGB color model to more closely align with the way humans perceive the process of color creation. So you have 3 numbers for HSL colors. So for example, if you make red, red would be 0 hue. Then if you wanted to make it a super poppy red, it would be 100 saturation. And then if you wanted to make this super bright, you would set brightness to 100%. But that would probably be a red. So you might want, excuse me, shouldn't have exited but then re-entered. There we go. So if you wanted just a poppy red, then that would be brightness 50%. But then if you wanted to change this maybe to orange, you would just need to move the hue and it would change color. So it makes this so much easier to update. So yeah, never use RGB. Try to use HSL. It's much easier for developers. And that's about it. So that's color theory. Now, there are a few effective color examples that I'd like to go over. The first one is The Verge. It's a very cool site I really enjoy visiting. Then also to open in the background, I'm opening cowboy.bike and cocta.eu. So The Verge has a very good pink plus yellow complementary color combination. So notice how there's a pink plus yellow hue border box around the content, which is quite good. Then they use black to contrast against that, which makes for high impact layout. So this is definitely a very good color combination to go to using the color combination methods we just reviewed. Then Cowboy is another site I really like because notice how it's monochromatic. There's only pink, but it is done in such a good way that it actually looks pretty great for just being one single color. I would say it's fantastic looking for just using one color. So it uses pink, shades of pink, and shades of even black and white to just contrast with it, because black and white just go so well with almost all the colors if done correctly. So yeah, another great design showing that you don't need multiple colors for this to work. And finally, we have Cocta. This is a fantastic site. I really dig this because it uses which color combination? I don't know them all by memory. This is triadic. So it uses triadic color combination to combine the blue and yellow color schemes. So notice how that blue and yellow shades go really well together, and it makes for a very eye-popping design. This looks fantastic. I really like this design. It gives me a very tropical feel. So pretty cool design. And that's about it as far as examples go. If you're interested in learning more, these are also some of my favorite links. So you have a color theory for designers, the meaning of color, and you understanding concepts and terminology. These are also must reads if you want to improve your understanding. This is a fantastic crash course by the web design authority Smashing Magazine. And if you're trying to create a color combination, Adobe has a fantastic tool called the Color Wheel, which if you open it, basically it gives you a super easy way to create color combinations, as you will see soon. So here we can just select the color combination you want to make. Let's say we want to make a triad color combination. So here's a triad. Let's set that to triad. And now we can just adjust our colors. And depending on where we landed, notice how it all updates automatically. So it's a great tool to use while combining colors. And then last but not least, the Explore tab. So Adobe Colors Explore tab is also an all-time favorite of mine, because if I'm ever like, okay, I'm really stuck, I have no idea what colors to use, I just want some inspiration, and these are user submitted color submissions, and these are very good looking. Like you can sort them by most popular, all time, or month, week, and just get some cool inspiration for colors to use on your next site. So yeah, this almost feels like cheating, but who cares, right? Like when you're new to this, you need every little help you can get. So yeah, feel free to check those links out once you get the slides. And then whitespace. Whitespace is also a very fun topic. So whitespace is something that me personally I had a lot of trouble with when I was first learning web design, because I felt like adding whitespace just felt like a waste of space. And let me tell you why. So whitespace is usually is sometimes, excuse me. So white space is sometimes referred to as negative space, and it is the portion of a page left unmarked or blank, or even just the empty space within a page. So in web design, we normally refer to white space to this text, to the space between graphics, columns, images, text, margins, and other elements. And this is the space that is left untouched in order to smooth things out and transform a page into something elegant. So it sounds like it's pretty important, but again, why is it so important, right? Like, why are we just wasting space by leaving it empty? But it turns out that it's actually important because white space is capable of conveying meaning. So here's a great example. Notice how this is the same image and same text, but the amount of white space basically just changes the meaning entirely. So the one on the left sounds very like, hey, ease away your aches and pains with our new mask. So it's very in your face, like, hey, pay attention to me. While the one on the right is a lot more, how can I put it? It just gives you so much of a more tranquility feeling, soothing feeling, like, oh yeah, ease away your aches and pains with our new face mask. So notice how the entire meaning changes just with different white space amounts. And this also, just before you forget, remember we covered that the medium of communication also needs to be known, so you know how design will be altered. So in this scenario, the one on the right would probably be a great fit for a large placement, like maybe a huge, poster across the street. But the one on the left, yeah, that definitely wouldn't look very good on a super large placeholder. Maybe this would go great on a small spot in a newspaper ad or something like that. So yeah, white space, super important at conveying meaning. Also, white space is usually used also as a means of attention. So the absence of content almost always just helps to bring even more attention to the elements of display. And a fantastic example of that is Google. I think there's been quite a few studies on that, but one of the biggest reasons why Google just worked so well and just has had undefeated success over the years is its simplicity. Like, it's just to the point. Here's the Google logo, here's the search box, here's search. That's it. There's nothing more to it. And in all the years it's existed, its layout has changed surprisingly little. And if you compare this to other browsers, you'll notice other browsers like Bing or Yahoo, these are a lot more things going on, and it makes them look a lot more busy, which distracts from what's important in this case, which is actually searching for something. So yeah, definitely a great example of how it can be used as a means of attention. And then also, something we don't often consider is that high amounts of content can also be distracting. So instead of having the positive effect of saying, hey, the user can focus on more content without having to change the page, it actually makes it harder to focus on the actual content. And this is a great example. Just by seeing this, just by seeing this, you should be familiar enough to say, I think I know which one of these two you want to read. Because yeah, like the left one has more information, but the right one is just so much more comfortable to read because of the better use of white space. So yeah, white space can definitely help you focus. So consider that. All right. And finally, last bullet point, less is more. So by focusing on less content, the more valuable and important the content is still available becomes. And a great example of this for me is The Verge. I like to check a lot of tech news sites, and I think you've noticed that a lot of news sites try to cram as much content as possible in their initial page. Like, there's just so much going on, you have no idea what to focus on. And The Verge takes the opposite approach. They basically make huge thumbnails of every news, and they're not just like outrageously large for no reason. They're actually done that way so that it's easier for those huge news to grab your attention. So I visit this page and I see Apple's logo and I see, okay, I'm an Apple fan, I have to read this. Or then I see this laptop, and if I'm like a tech guy, I'm going to say, oh, this looks like something I should check out. Or if I'm maybe more of a car guy, I see the picture of a car, I see Tesla keyword, oh, that's a link I need to check. So less suddenly became a lot more valuable. And this is why some sites like The Verge use this layout, because it's a lot more powerful. And if you write quality journalism, it makes it easy for it to stand out from the crowd. So less is definitely more in many situations. So keep that in mind, all right? And time for some effective whitespace examples. So here's 4 examples we definitely need to go over. So medium, Luca Volino, and scope dash typeface. So medium is one of my favorites. Basically, medium is a site for blogging, but I really like how the blogs that basically people write, the layout medium adds makes it very clean looking. Like, look at all the white space. That looks amazing. That just tells my brain this looks so comfortable to read. Like, this is just great. And just the vast amount of white space makes for distraction-free reading, which is something really nice here. And overall, it's a lovely layout. I really like medium. Then we have Luca Volino, a UI UX designer. Also a very clean layout, like straight to the point. Like, here's one of my projects. Here's the description, here's some info about it, and here it is. Like, there's nothing more to it. Want to learn more? Just click on view case, but it's straight to the point. Very clean layout with tons of useful white space all around. So very good. And last but not least, scope. This is a very simplistic, minimalist site, but I loved it because everything is so huge, but at the same time, it's not distracting. It makes it super easy to focus on each section at a time, like what the heck is scope, give us some examples of scope, which is just a font. So overall, it's a very nice layout. It's straight, it's direct, it's to the point, it gives you no distractions, like here it is, like here's all the information you need, that's it. And there's nothing more to it. It doesn't waste time around. So also a very good layout. I really like this one, scope. So yeah, that's all for that. Let's move into the white space to learn more section. So to learn more, I definitely need to update this. I think I had the correct slide. I made some tweaks. I think I forgot to update this one. So I'll be pushing an update soon for this one. But yeah, regarding white space, at least there's not that much to learn on. There's definitely a lot more info on color theory and typography. So we have the final section, which is UI UX design. So this one, I'm not going to delve into too much detail because it's not design oriented, but I felt it was worth covering, definitely, because it's something that we don't often consider when we start designing. So UX design is actually short for user experience, and it's a skill that most designers are actually expected to have. So when we say user experience, we are referring to how humans interact with a product, be it online or in the physical world. This term was coined by Don Norman, the co-founder of the Nielsen Norman Group, and he declared that all user experiences encompasses all the aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. And user experience is all about feelings, because it goes beyond the human-computer interaction, and it puts emphasis on the human side. This is why people classify an experience as a personal moment. And I think we all had moments like this. I had moments like that. I've had moments where I downloaded an app, I started using it, and I don't know, it just gives me an impression like, wow, this is a very cool app. I don't know why, I can't put my finger on it, but it's very easy to navigate. It looks gorgeous. Like it left me with a very positive impression of it. That's good UX. So it's all about the feelings. Then UX is also very importantly depending on the context on which the product is used. And this basically means that because the circumstances under which a product is used constantly change over time, the UX also involves understanding the larger context in which users operate and discovering what part of a product plays in their lives. This just means that if a product maybe that wasn't useful because you were using it in a specific context suddenly is moved around to a city or a different locale where it wasn't prepared for, it might change. Like, it might improve its user experience or it might be worsened. So location and context is key as far as UX goes. And then last but not least is that a user's experience will evolve over time. So a user experience with a product is always dynamic. And the best example of this is our smartwatches. So when the product came to market, novices users tried to use the product, and most people, understandably, were very confused. Like, what the heck is a smartwatch, and why do I even need one? And they had mixed feelings because they had no context for what to expect. But later, when they became more familiar with the concept of smartwatches and depend on its value, then the experience suddenly grew increasingly positive, and they became emotionally attached. I know this was okay for me. When I first bought my first smartwatch, I was like, I don't really know why I should be using this. But as time went on and people started using them more, and more use cases for it came out, like answering calls through it, getting notifications with sound to actually, like, so you can actually stop taking out your watch, using voice to communicate with your phone, so you have to take your phone out less. Overall, I just grew more attached to it. And even more so with the recent new Apple Watch announcement, which has, I think, even more medical tools to monitor heart rate and that you don't have any major illnesses. So overall, this is how user experiences change and evolve over time. So that's all we have as far as user experience goes. And there's also the process, which is something we'll also try to go over very quick. So the process for a UX design is something like this. So there's about 5 to 6 major phases. So the first one is the research phase. So when you're building your product, you should get to know your end user. So your end user, you need to know its traits, market distribution, anything you can learn about them. And you can usually do this using something like online surveys, interviews, or market share analysis. So, okay, you know your user. Now what? Next step is the analysis phase. So now analysis is when you start reviewing the information from the research phase and actually create insights from them, most notably personas and scenarios. So personas are basically just a representation of what your average user will look like. So let's say if I'm making an app for, I don't know, for to-dos, a to-do app, one of my personas might be a student going through college that needs a way to get all his notes jotted down. So that's a persona. And then a scenario could be something like, a scenario for my to-do app is a college student that has trouble saving his notes to one cohesive place. So he's going to use my to-do app to save the notes for one of his topics. Then another scenario is maybe trying to organize multiple notes into a group as a collection. So yeah, personas and scenarios is super important when designing your product. And once that's done, we have the final step in as far as like actually making the design, which is the design phase. So the design phase is basically a collaborative and iterative process. And during this phase is when we actually start the design of the actual product. And it can usually be done in a multitude of ways, such as wireframing, prototyping. And we say it's iterative because here's a step where the designer definitely needs to like go back to the feedback they got from the analysis phase and just verify that the personas and scenarios aren't getting lost in the transition. And that also applies to the release phase, because the release phase is when the actual design goes into production phase. And albeit this means that, yeah, the design will be coded now, so there's nothing more to do for the designer. It's important that he still participates and provides continuous feedback during this phase to make sure the original vision isn't lost during the process. And this is exactly why designers are expected to have some markup knowledge, so some programming knowledge, so that they have an easier time communicating with the developers while this release phase is going on. And finally, the feedback phase. So, like nature's constant evolution, UX is a never-ending process, meaning that once the product is live on the market, you should strive to start the entire UX process from the beginning to continuously improve our product. All right? So, that's UX. Now, to learn more, these are also some of my favorite sites. So, Laws of UX and UX Myths. If I were you, I would just stop everything you're doing right now and visit those two sites. These are amazing sites, especially because they aren't targeted towards designers. Like these are links that you can use as a developer to identify some of the biggest pillars and recommendation and tips to improve the UX of your sites. So, for example, if you go to Laws of UX, they give you some very powerful tips to improve the UX of your site. Like, for example, law number one of UX. aesthetic usability effect says that users often perceive aesthetically pleasing design as design that's more usable. Basically, it just says that if it looks pretty, users will think it's usable. It's kind of like cheating, but it's important you still know this. Like, making a site look good, it makes the user feel it's intuitive, even if it's not. That's why this goes so hand in hand. Then we have other very important rules, like, for example, this is one that I think is particularly important. Jacob's Law. Jacob's Law says that users spend most of the time on other sites. So if your site behaves the way other sites behave, then users will have an easier time and enjoy your site even more. A good example is this icon right here. This is the hamburger menu. Users are super familiar with this icon and what it means. So if you decided, hey, I'm going to be original and use a triangle, cool for being original, but I'm fairly certain users might have no idea what the triangle means, and they might not enjoy your design decision. Like, it's cool to be original, but be conscious that users expect your site to work like other sites, so they don't have to spend additional time learning. And just like that, you can find tons of other laws here, which are amazing, just to improve the UX of your site. So definitely check this out. And then UX Myths is also just an amazing site to check, because it debunks all the most common myths of UX design. So basically, all the biggest misconceptions about good UX. So, for example, myth number 1: people read on the web. This is a huge lie. We all know that. People on the web do not read. They skim. They scan, and they analyze. That's it. And they even give you all these myths have. All these debunkings have solid proof and links to articles and studies showcasing this, debunking this as a myth. So, yeah, debunked. Then we have another myth like, let's say, accessible sites are ugly. This is also a good myth, because some people don't like adding accessibility to sites, and here they give you some examples. That's a lie. Then you have other things like design has to be original. That's a fantastic myth to debunk. Design has to be original. That's a huge lie as well. As long as you make enough diversity between it, I would say it's good enough. And they give you enough material to cover this. And yeah, it just goes so on and so on. And these are just incredible to read. Like, they're really illuminating, if you ask me. So definitely check those out. These are amazing reads. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We finished on time. We still have 10 minutes for questions. So, thank you for attending the session. Thank you. Just noticed that nobody else showed up, but that's okay. It's giving the session that matters. Is there anything you'd like to... Oh, really? Oh, wow. I wasn't expecting you to learn anything, to be honest. I was like... she's probably just going to see how I did, but okay, thank you. I really appreciate that, really. Seriously. Have 10 minutes online, so... Oh, I do print design, so I don't know much about web design. Okay, that's fair. So you probably got bored the first part of it, but maybe the UX part was interesting for you. Yeah, because, yeah, that's... The UX process is something that we actually do, not just in design. We actually do that in web development work. Like, before we start making a product, the UX process has a surprising amount of stuff that has to do with business. Like, when you're starting a business idea, you should actually, the first step would be to work through the UX process. If you want to start a business, go through the UX process, because you'd be surprised at how much it actually matters to make sure you have the user satisfied with your product, service, whatever. So yeah, have 10 minutes, so you can leave if you want. I don't mind, but if you have anything you'd like to discuss, ask, well, feel free to go ahead. Or even turn on your mic if you want, if it's easier than typing. It's up to you, really. All right, no problem. Well, have a nice evening, Leslie. Glad to have you. That way, yeah, it would have been kind of depressing to have nobody show up, but I really appreciate you joining. Thank you so much. I hope you have a nice weekend, and I'll be seeing you next session, or in case you're interested, there's a Chrome DevTools fundamental session going on next, which I don't know if you RSVP'd, but in case you haven't, that'll be just for debugging and understanding CSS and HTML related issues a bit better, as well as Ajax calls. So maybe you'll find it useful. I don't know. So consider attending if you have the chance. It'll be happening about half an hour from now. So yeah, just a heads up. All right. Oh, sure. No worries. Totally understand. The good news is I did record the session and I plan to record the next one. So if you're interested, I'll be sharing the link to the recording on the Slack channel, so you can always watch it on your free time, maybe on some Saturday or Sunday. It's up to you. I decided to do it because I felt like, especially this next session, I think you and a lot of my students would definitely benefit from the DevTools one, as well as a debugging JavaScript session. I think I will host on Sunday. So yeah, I'll record that and you can watch it in your free time, all right? Cool. Enjoy your dinner, Leslie. Have a nice evening. Take care. Bye-bye.